Hi, thanks for joining. Our talk today is called Better Quality Through Building Capacity. Uh, my name's Piers Campbell. I'm a head of delivery at the National Citizen Service Trust. The NCS Trust is an organisation that funds and coordinates an evolving set of youth services for young people up and down the country. My role there is to coach and support its software engineering and data and analytics teams. In doing that, I think a lot about how to develop those teams. And part of developing those teams is developing how they interact with other teams and parts of the wider organisation. And naturally, notions of quality and capacity are always foremost in our mind, as they are, I'm sure, in your organisations and in all organisations to some extent. In thinking about that, we try to have conversations and build on ideas and do a lot of research. And our jumping off point for this talk comes in a piece of research, some reading I did relatively recently. So this is a traffic jam. We all know that. And there's a school of thought that the solution to congestion is to create more lanes or build another level. But there's also an opposing school of thought based on an economic principle called induced demand, which is the idea that increasing supply makes people want even more of what is being supplied. Now, in 2009, a couple of economists at the University of Pennsylvania compared the amount of new roads built in various American cities over a 20-year period with the total of miles driven in the same period. And they found a consistent relationship there. Every time capacity went up, the number of hours driven didn't maintain and become an easier experience, but the number of hours driven went up as well. So they called this the fundamental law of road congestion, the notion that new roads will create new drivers, resulting in the intensity of traffic staying the same. So I came to wonder whether this mirrors our experiences of work. We know we have a kind of like an amount of work to do. We're required to deliver a certain amount of output. And if we need to deliver more, our thoughts are to build capacity, to add into that. But what if adding capacity doesn't get the results we want? What if it doesn't affect the quality of work we're doing and our capability in delivering better work? So I thought that would be a good assumption to start our conversation today. The notion that perhaps at work, adding capacity simply creates more work, resulting in quality and capability remaining the same. And if that is the case, what can we do about that? So let's jump into that idea then. And first, I think it's probably helpful if we're examining the relationship between capacity and quality and capability to first define those terms. So firstly, capacity is just what we have, our environment, our resource to do work. And when we think about capacity, most often we think about it in terms of the amount of time we have to do that work, often budget, can we afford to do that work, and often headcount. Do we have enough people to actually do that work in that amount of time and with that amount of budget? But there are also factors that feed into capacity that we don't always consider as well. So things like energy. Do our teams or organizations actually have the reserves of energy to really deliver high quality work on time there? Do they feel motivated? Can they connect the work and the purpose of the organization with the purpose of their teams and the purpose of the individuals in there? And there's also something there around cadence. Does that team or organization have a drumbeat, a rhythm that it is able to deliver to, that it makes it a lot easier to estimate how much work it is able to do? And there's a role for leaders in kind of like not just defining capacity, but adjusting it as well. And really the role of leaders there is to provide that capacity. So to look where that team is wanting in a particular area, to fulfill its expectations, and to add and provide in those areas as well. So that's our definition of capacity. If we look again then at a definition of capability. Now, when we talk about how capable we are to achieve a task, to achieve a particular expectation or outcome. We tend to look at it quite a lot of times in terms of skills. Do we have the ability to execute in this area? And tools. Do we have what we need on a day-to-day basis to actually perform these tasks? But capability itself is a bit wider than that. And really capability in a team, certainly, and definitely in an organization, speaks a lot about the propensity to learn and improve. So do we have the skills and tools to do this job, but also are we getting better at doing that job on an ongoing basis? And if we look at the leader's role in building capability, then it's exactly that, to build. We need to be making sure that our teams and organizations are getting more and more capable with all of the work that we're doing. Excuse me. And finally, there's definitions of quality as well. So what do we mean by quality? Well, quality is something that has received kind of like numbers of definitions in various different contexts and various different environments. But for me, this one is helpful. Quality is the degree to which an object or an entity, like a process, a product, or a service, satisfies a specified set of attributes or requirements. Are we meeting requirements? Are we meeting the expectation of what we set out to do in the first place? That's our standard definition of quality. But we can also look beyond those expectations when we're trying to measure and improve quality, right? So we know we want to improve and deliver those desired outputs, but we also want those outputs to lead to the outcomes and impact that we want our work to have in the first place. So we tend to kind of like fixate and focus quite a lot on outputs when we think about quality, but maybe we will have better results if we expand our notion of quality to look at the outcomes of that work and the impact of that work as well. And really, the leader's role here is to define that for teams. It's certainly the case that when we go in and set objectives on a project, for example, or a program of work, or whether we're just trying to execute a number of tasks, we tend to look at quality just as, have we met initial expectation? But if a leader is able to widen and broaden that definition right from the outset, from the beginning of a piece of work, then it stands to reason we'd achieve a better result there. So we have those three notions of capacity, capability, and quality. What's their relationship? How do they play together? Well, I'm going to talk now about a scenario that I've seen, and I know from my conversations with people in other organizations does recur as well. So firstly, let's start our way in here is at the top there. Let's say we're beginning a piece of work and we have no real knowledge of our capacity when we start that piece of work. The knock-on effect of that is that we're not really able to plan effectively. We don't know how much work we can achieve. It's very difficult to forecast and predict when we will have done it and to what quality we will have done it. So if we're not able to plan effectively, that can have at least two outcomes, right? Firstly, in the first instance, that work can be delayed. We will deliver late on that because we didn't have the resources we need to do it in the first place. Or secondly, we deliver work on time, but it's not of the quality that we would necessarily desire. So work is delayed or low quality work is delivered there. Once that happens, the pitfall that sometimes we fall into is we look at those results and we post-rationalize them. Instead of going back and being honest and saying, well, we wanted to achieve this, but we didn't get our capacity right, so our plan wasn't right, what we try to do is cover tracks and say, well, this is what we meant to do all of the time. We were delayed because of other reasons, external reasons. The quality of work was of a lower quality, but that's what we were looking for all the time. That post-rationalization, which is kind of like instinctive that people do to protect themselves and their teams, is understandable. But the knock-on effect of that is that we're not able to learn about where we could have improved in that. And if we're not able to honestly look at results and learn from them, we're going to go back to the beginning and start again with no knowledge of our capacity. It's a loop, and it's tempting to be kind of like melodramatic and refer to this as a kind of a death spiral or something. But I think the more honest definition of it is it's more of a fatigue loop, Right? If we put a team or an organisation through this time and time again, we'll continue producing results at a certain level, but people will get more and more tired, and more the results will be less and less effective as time goes on. The real risk with a loop like this isn't that it doesn't work, it's that in a way it does work, because you can carry on like this. In many ways, you'll still deliver an amount of results. You will have an audience for your post-rationalization. You'll be able to disguise the fact that we're not learning, and that cycle will carry on and carry on and carry on. But the fact is, the people that are involved in doing that work will get less motivated, more tired, and more disconnected from what they're trying to do in the first place. So, as leaders, our job is to intervene in this, try new things, try and work out how we can actually make improvements in these areas. So there we can enter at any of those points, really, knowledge of capacity, quality of work, or ability to learn. So let's have a look to see, first of all, what happens, what interventions we could make if we were trying to intervene from a quality perspective. Well, we talked about defining quality, and so maybe that's our first place to start here, right? Setting quality as an objective. So as leaders, if we're starting a piece of work, we can try to make sure that quality metrics or measures are there from the outset. It's something that we're thinking about and we have at the foremost, the top of our minds, if you like, when we start a piece of work. If we have that, a way of measuring quality and considering quality as we move through the work, then we can almost performance manage that in the same way that we performance manage the volume of work and the output of work there as well. And especially, obviously, we performance manage time as well. It becomes another one of our metrics that we are considering all of the time. Another intervention there is we can switch to scenarios for quality. So if we know the world is moving around us, but we have a level of quality we want to achieve, then we want to define that baseline right from the outset. However, if we have various different versions of what a piece of quality looks like, and there's a framework we use called good and better and best here, if we say this is what quality looks like in a good result here, this is what quality looks like in a better result, but this is what quality looks like in the best result, then we can accommodate change and make choices based on those scenarios as work progresses and we learn and learn. Another thing a leader can do here is really strongly advocate for quality in the work they're doing. So we know in that fatigue loop there is that rationalization. We've all done it and we've all seen it being done at the end of kind of like larger, complex pieces of work, or even simpler, straightforward pieces of work. Really, the job of the leader there is to put a hand up and say, are we doing this? Are we rationalizing a piece of work that didn't go quite right? Are we denying ourselves the opportunity to learn there as well? Another thing we can do as advocates for quality is actually communicate the outcomes and impact of higher quality work. What happens when we focus on quality? What good results can we do? What examples can we set for our own behaviours in the future, but for the behaviours of our colleagues and wider organisations as we move forward from there? So some ideas there on intervening, on defining quality to try and break that fatigue loop as well. Let's have a look at the interventions we can make around building capability. So firstly, capability, not just our skills and tools, remember, but our propensity to improve, our constant improvement, getting better all the time. The first thing we do if we're trying to build capability around those areas of quality and capacity is document and share, right? So ensure that we've got definitions for what good quality work is, but what our capacity is as a team or an organisation as well, and share that with everyone who will be impacted by the work we're doing. Scenarios will kind of like spring out of that, but as long as those scenarios are available and understandable to all of your audiences, we start by having a decent understanding of what capability is at the outset of a piece of work, or even in the middle of a piece of work. It's never too late to actually define and communicate and document and share in those ways. Whenever I talk about capability, I also always talk about the importance of reflection and reviewing and reorientation in that as well. Reflection is just a good team superpower, and it's the way it gets better all of the time. But what we can do if we're trying to address a situation like this is use quality and capacity as lenses for reflection. Again, there is a tendency and perhaps an instinct to drift towards volume and time as the focuses for our reflection. Did we do enough work? Did we do this work in time? But if we have quality as a lens from an outset, or even capacity as a lens from the outset, was the work good enough? Will the results it have be good enough? And did we have all we needed to do this work well? If they become lenses for reflection as well, we'll start to see improvement actions spring from that reflection that will actually improve there. Lastly, in building capability, we can set learning objectives on quality and capacity. We can make quality, really from a leadership perspective, the primary measure of success rather than volume or time. And if it becomes the primary measure of success, then we can focus our learning activities on it when we look to add knowledge and add experience to the team. If we're doing that from a quality perspective, we'll see different results. Capacity management as well. Do we have enough to do this work? Doesn't have to just belong to leadership. That can be a team behaviour, and it can be an ongoing team conversation while we're in the middle of work like that as well. Not just during our reflection, but also during our execution as we go through the work cycle. And the last group of interventions then, how do we improve at providing capacity for our teams? Well, the first thing we really need to do is define the capacity of our teams. And I think there's benefit in defining what a unit of work is for a team, but as well as looking at kind of like a unit of work and how long will this piece of work take us in terms of time and how many people. Again, going back to the areas of, can we define what our energy is for this piece of work and our motivation is for this piece of work? Because we know we will deliver better work more quickly if it is something that we feel energized and motivated to do. And really, if we know we're entering into a piece of work which is not particularly engaging and does not connect our teams with personal purpose, then it's likely to take longer to do and be more difficult to generate quality from. So there is something in there about, can we define a base unit of work there and use that to plan and forecast as well. There are similarities there in the world of software development and estimation, and that's a kind of like a hot topic and poisonous online discourse that we don't need to get into there. I'm not talking about this in terms of communicating and forecasting, but more in central definition. How much work do we think we'll be able to do in an amount of time with these people, with this energy and with this motivation? We forecast and plan based on that unit, but the forecasting and planning is almost internal to that team. I think we use it to manage expectations externally rather than making commitments externally. Second intervention providing capacity is to try to avoid working at 100% of capacity. And this is very easy to say and very difficult to do. I acknowledge that. But really, the leadership role there is to communicate with client groups and colleagues, to communicate and influence and make space for that team, kind of like elbow other pieces of work out of the way and view working at full capacity as the exception rather than the norm. If we continue to run at full capacity all of the time, it's just going to be an unknown piece of capacity that's feeding into our fatigue loop that we identified earlier. There's kind of like the Pareto principle talks about 80% being the kind of like a good level to work at as well. It is very, very difficult to maintain a level of engagement like that on an ongoing basis. But as a leader, I think the focus is try not to have everybody running 100% all of the time. And certainly, of course, when we go beyond 100% and we're overcommitting people, we're going to run into worse problems there. And final intervention then around providing capacity is not to add, but to subtract. So this speaks to our instincts just as people when we are trying to solve a problem, which is our first solution is, what can we add to this situation that will fix this problem? But if we're trying to kind of increase capacity and provide more, the job of a leader should be to focus first on what can be removed from the situation before what can be added. So are there extraneous tasks that we don't need to be doing that aren't contributing to our quality that we could remove from this? Do we have kind of like processes that aren't particularly efficient? Are we using our time as well as we can? What can we take away that will give us more time and space and ability to do this work, rather than what can we add, or certainly before, what can we add to achieve that? So there are various ways into that cycle to actually make improvements in terms of capacity and quality and capability there. And really what we would be looking to do is change our fatigue loop from a starting position of having no knowledge of capacity to having a better knowledge of capacity. We'll never have kind of like 100% knowledge of what we're able to do, because we know we work in kind of like in complex environments where changes are constant. However, if we do develop a better knowledge of capacity, that's going to increase our ability to plan effectively. We still won't get it 100% right. We still might not hit every date and every expectation, but our ability to plan effectively will improve. And then as we deliver work as a result of that, we can put ourselves in a position where we can assess the results of that work openly and honestly. If we're looking at the work we've delivered, if we're seeing what the quality was, what the time taken to do it was, whether we hit all of those or not, if we're able to learn from that, what we will have learned will feed into our knowledge of future capacity when we start all over again. We move away from the notion of a fatigue loop into a learning loop, basically. We're constantly learning, we're constantly improving, we're constantly getting better. That's it. The title of the talk was improving quality by building capacity. But capability is a really, really important part of that, I think, when we talk about teams and organizations. And I think in the same way that we look at projects being a kind of like a trade-off between scope and time and resource, then really there is a similar triangular relationship between these two things when we're trying to do work such as this as well. Before we finish, though, let's just revisit our traffic jam. There's real complexity and nuance in the relationship between capacity and capability and quality, just as there was complexity and nuance in that fundamental law of road congestion that we talked about earlier. So that hasn't just been taken at face value. Other studies have challenged the methodology of that paper. Further studies as well have found contradictory results that challenge the notion of induced demand itself. Elsewhere, there's been work that's really built on that notion of induced demand and expanded it to include benefit as well as capacity. And so it's looked at the idea that dynamic benefits in the kind of like traffic jam situation, like faster speeds, or the systemic benefits of saving time, are actually what drove up the road use, rather than just that very simplistic relationship with capacity we talked about. However, additionally to that, other papers have found that research in social sciences contains such a high rate of false positives in their findings that the results are very often impossible to replicate, and that most studies in these areas should just be considered wrong. It can be a rabbit hole we go down, and what this really illustrates is that any analysis of a situation or any action taken is really just a reflection of our best effort at a particular time. And the search for something constant and replicable shouldn't be what we're actually trying to achieve as leaders when we're trying to improve our teams, our organizations, and ourselves, I suppose. This quote is from the filmmaker Werner Herzog, who said he never sees truth as a fixed star on the horizon, but always as an activity or a search or an approximation. And I think if we really want to be better, if we want our organizations, our teams and ourselves to be better, that's what we need to keep doing. Keep asking questions, keep searching, and keep acting. That's it for us today. Thank you very much for joining. Your time and attention is very much appreciated. I hope there's been something of interest for you here. And thank you again. Bye-bye.